All right, Jamie, it's that time again. I'm excited to talk about, wait a minute, interest rates. We never talk about interest rates.
We talk about interest rates. I talk about interest rates all the time. So
Awesome. So this is our second ever live, and I'm going to try to figure out if there are comments and chats and stuff like that. But in the meantime, I think we should dive into our topic of today. And that is, of course, the Fed met over the last 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday, and they just cut rates a quarter point. And everyone is debating whether that is a good thing or a bad thing. And simultaneously, we've got a lot of public firings. So I think there's a lot for us to talk about today.
absolutely is. It's going to be fun because, two things apparently Americans love to talk about: interest rates and firing people. It's all great. It's going to be a lot of fun. No, let's talk about it. So we had a 2-day meeting and we're finally into the September meeting. And this has been something that's been greatly anticipated, that the Fed was going to go ahead and cut interest rates by 25 basis points, 0.25%. And just as expected, they did exactly that. But that was not the headline. That was not what anybody cared about with what was going to happen. We had a lot of drama going on in the background as well, which caused a lot of uncertainty. And so what people were actually looking for was not what was the Fed going to do in September, but rather what is the guidance associated with what they were planning on doing in October and December, their next 2 meetings, and then further out with what's going on.
So, and I think you have something some stuff to share with us on what they're showing in guidance. I just want to, like, high level, I saw both sides of the argument online. I saw folks saying it's about time. We should have cut interest rates by now because we see we see the job number softening, really, is what we see at the moment. And a lot of these companies we've talked about, AI is making them more efficient and they're not hiring as many folks. And then we see the other side saying, but hang on, inflation is about to smack us down because supply chain is catching up with us, right? So I'm super curious to see what the Fed is saying is going to happen next. So
it is really interesting. So I'm going to go ahead and share. Let's see if I can get the right one the first time. There it is. So this is called a dot plot. Let's go ahead and share it so everybody else can. Yep. There we go. So this is the Fed's dot plot. This is something they issue every time they have a meeting, and we can actually see what it is. It's the individual Fed governors basically projecting into the future with what's going on. And what we have here is a very interesting and unusual situation this year. This is 2025's expectation for the year end. And that means we only have 2 Fed meetings between now and when this is supposed to be reality. And what we can see is there is a stream of Fed governors who think that they should cut one time during the next 2 meetings, and another stream of Fed governors who expect that we need 2 rate cuts between now and then. And then we've got our brand new Fed governor down here, which we're all pretty sure that's who it is, who is suggesting that we need a much bigger rate cut this year.
Is this supposed to be anonymous, or is it anonymous, by the way? I'm just curious.
It is technically anonymous.
Okay, yeah. But it's like, this is the new guy. So, I mean,
we know it's the new guy, right? It's the guy who got brought in to by Trump to do it. He got sworn in on Tuesday, and immediately that was the first thing that they did for the item. Now, there's been a lot of questions by Jerome Powell, whom we've talked about several times on this podcast, with basically being able to say this man is the ultimate diplomat. He knows how to keep his mouth shut. And he, once again, did exactly that. Like when people asked him a lot about the new Fed governor, his response was he brought an interesting conversation to the table, which is exactly what we want. Right. Yes. You cannot go into that table with these amazing economists without having your ducks in a row. And the guy knew that. And so if he is there, it is a place of spirited debate on purpose because they are dealing with forecasting the future. But again, really interesting is right now they're basically saying that everybody came out, and if you read headlines, Fed to cut 2 more times this year, that is a really big question mark, because this dot plot is actually showing us that a bunch of the Fed governors want 1 more rate cut, a bunch more want 2 rate cuts, and we have this. And actually, if you do the averages, it averages out to just one additional governor wanting 2 over 1. So I think we're going to probably see 1 in October. And then there's going to be a wait and see. If additional information comes out, we may see something change. So much uncertainty.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that uncertainty. We have a dual mandate, right? So the Fed's dual mandate, steady employment, low inflation. That's the kind of the goal associated with it. And right now we're in a situation of conflict. Okay, so we are starting to see weaker job numbers. When we see unemployment start to rise, weaker job numbers, employment start to decline, the way to fix that is to cut interest rates. That's what Trump is wanting. That's how we spur the economy, et cetera, right?
Yes.
On the flip side, we have inflation pressures associated with the tariffs. Right. So to keep inflation under control, you raise interest rates. That's there. Right. We are getting into a situation where we may have those items going the wrong direction, right? So one is going up while the other is going down, and the fixes for them are the opposite action by the Fed Gov. That is the big fear, which is why we're seeing this much more diverse spread projections of what's going to happen in 2026, 2027, which, by the way, right now is looking at 1 rate cut apiece, according to the projections. So we're going to see a little bit of short-term action, but the long-term, it's a really big question mark because the Fed doesn't know what is going to happen.
And so when we talked about this and the many times before, the one thing that you taught me, of the many, many things you've taught me, but was that it takes 18 months for us to understand the impact of a rate cut. So hence the reason that there's so much, the Trump administration has a ton of pressure on the Fed because they think that the interest rates are slowing down growth of the economy, right? And so, and every administration says the same thing. Like, it doesn't matter who's president, you want growth. And then so it's, that part is not unusual at all. But the Fed is absolutely terrified that they will create spiraling inflation.
Exactly right.
Yeah. And
like 1970s inflation, where we're going to end up having to raise interest rates really, really high in order to try to prevent them. And they don't want that to happen.
Right. And I think if you are the current sitting president, you are driving to push the economy. Doesn't matter which administration you're in, you are driving to push the economy. And the idea that you may not be like, there is no third term for this particular sitting president. So he doesn't have to live with the consequences, right? So I could see that, right? I could see where if you were a first term president, you might have a little bit of reluctance in that, because if that spiraling inflation happens in your second term, it's kind of hard to blame your predecessor, right? So I think that from a leadership perspective, I could, the consequences may seem relatively minimal to the person doing the pushing.
So that's a really great point, but I'm actually going to pivot then and suggest that what do leaderships do with this situation? Because there is no clear guidance. Are interest rates really going to drop, or are they going to go up? Because we saw short-term interest rates drop. We saw long-term interest rates actually creep up a little bit associated with it, suggesting there's a really big mixed message. The market doesn't know what's going to happen. The economists don't need to know what's going to happen. And what do you do as a leader of a local business?
So the things that in all the cases we've studied so far, in all the business that we've studied, and the challenging times they've been through, we've seen time and time again, making any decision that affects you positively in the long term is the right decision, right? So I think trying to time the market right now is a terrible idea. Trying to time tariffs is a terrible idea. Making all the right decisions to set you up for long-term resilience and growth, I think is probably the right term, but the right idea. You have any thoughts on that?
No, I absolutely agree. It's just hard at this point, right? Yeah. Which is trying to determine what is the long term going to look like. Am I going to need to invest a huge amount in AI right now? Am I going to need to borrow in order to do that? Is this the right time to borrow? Right. Or is the economy about ready to go into a tank? So this is not the time in which to invest in a massive infrastructure project. Right. Or is the savings I'm going to get out of the employment, right, going to offset the amount of money that I'm putting in, because maybe AI can allow me to fire half my workers. There's so many questions right now that it's just kind of crazy.
Right.
Speaking of firing and the Fed, right? There's
Yes.
so much more drama. I mean, while the economics behind it, the fundamentals of the Fed is a fascinating argument that we can have right now. The politics is just something that is screaming across the headlines, right?
Agreed.
So we have the brand new Fed guy come in. He's, of course, suggesting big rate cuts. That's there, but he's, operating in it. But then we also had Governor Cook still show up on and participate in the Tuesday and Wednesday meeting.
Yes. And there was an attempt to fire her, right? There was an attempt to fire Governor Cook.
She's actually been fired, right? So Trump technically fired her.
And then the courts got involved. Yes.
He sued.
Yep.
They stayed the firing. The Trump administration then appealed the stay. And on Monday night, before the Tuesday morning item, the stay was upheld. They lost their appeal on the stay. So as of right now, Lisa Cook is employed at the Fed. Now, a couple of things to say. Number one, the Fed has said whatever the results of the lawsuits, that is what they will abide by. They are not going to take a stand either behind or in front of Lisa Cook. That is not what their plan is. They are going to just do whatever they are told they need to do, which I think is a legitimate point of view.
Yes, agreed. I totally agree. And because they're supposed to be independent, right?
Supposed to be.
Yeah,
but there's so much going on here, right? Which is that this individual sued to try to keep her job.
Right. Yes. And so I started to do some research on so what could Lisa Cook be fired for? Now, the reasoning, the logic given currently is that she committed a crime. Now, she's not been found guilty of a crime. And as I understand it, the idea of the crime, right, the allegations that happened before she took office. And so there are many things the many things that she countered with, saying, number one, you can't be fired for something that you did before office. And number two, like and that's essentially what the law said. The judges said, this doesn't apply. She didn't actually do any wrongdoing. But then I thought, well, can't she just be fired because she's a Democrat? Like, that was a question I had. Like, what couldn't he just say, well, you're not on my party, you're fired? And that's where I found out that actually most civil servants or most people are in civil service jobs cannot be fired for their political affiliation. Now, so except for the political appointees, the head of the Treasury, not the head of the Fed, but hopefully not the head of the Fed, but the head of the Treasury, any of the cabinet members, all are political appointees, much of the White House staff. So they cannot be fired for their, they can be let go for their political affiliations, but not Lisa Cook, not the other civil servants.
And the Supreme Court weighed in on this when Trump attempted to fire Jerome Powell earlier, which is basically that she has to be able to fire for cause.
Right.
And so there has to be a cause. So Trump is now latching on to this potential mortgage fraud by Lisa Cook. She declared 2 homes supposedly in documentation as her primary residence, although she has subsequently released information to show that in other locations, at least, maybe not the mortgage application, which is the thing in question, but at least in other locations, she had declared one as a primary residence, one as a vacation home. That's there. So the reason that supposedly that this happened is that if you do declare a primary residence, you get a more favorable interest rate loan. That's there. So this is supposedly her trying to save money and con somebody and suggesting a vacation home as a personal loan. Regardless of the truth, veracity, whatever it is behind it, this actually has zero to do with her job as governor of the Federal Reserve. And so that becomes the more pressing issue, I think, for you and I, which is, if it has nothing to do with your job, can you be fired for something?
And actually, I mean, who hasn't done something wrong in their life, right? So that would be the first thing. Is I do think that this will have negative consequences on politics in general, right? Just because you have to be maybe a little bit crazy to do some of this, go into politics anyway, just because of all the inspection, right? But in general, everybody's done something wrong at some point in their life. So you can, I think,
I mean, you say something wrong. I mean, this is potentially a mischecked box on a
yes,
loan
agreed.
application.
Yeah.
This could be a speeding ticket, right? My
Right.
husband got one a couple weeks ago. Could that cause him to lose his job?
So I think that's where I do think that we'll see the Supreme Court. So they did go to the Supreme Court. They have gone to the Supreme Court even after the rate cuts and are asking for them to step in. I honestly don't think that they will. I don't think the Supreme Court will say that this is that this can the firing can be allowed to happen. We'll see. But the arguments against that she has not committed a crime, or they have not alleged that she committed a crime in office. I think that is going to be the thing that they lean on. But we've also seen firings that I know we thought were somewhat unexpected, firings over public free speech, right? Or thinking free speech recently.
So
as well.
we're gonna tread very carefully here.
Of course,
you and I do not want to put our own jobs at risk.
Exactly.
But there has been a series of high profile articles out there
Right.
of individuals who have been fired as a result of either insensitive or inappropriate or a biased, I'm going to say, statements surrounding the death of Charlie Kirk.
Right. Absolutely. And, there's this huge debate over freedom of speech. And then what can you say and what should you say? What is responsible to say? And so I did some digging on this one too. I was like, well, who can be fired? I've always assumed, working for a private company, I worked for one for decades, that I could be sued over anything I said on social media if I made my company look bad. And so, but now I happen to work for a public institution, and I thought, I wonder what the rules are. And so what we've seen is several folks in K-12 and public institutions where they have been fired for statements. It doesn't matter what the statement is, but it's a statement that was contrary to what they said that was the school's code of conduct or anything written into their handbook about how you show up as a workplace or workplace civility. So you can be fired in 49 states plus the District of Columbia at will, right? They can fire you for anything at any time, anywhere, except for the
Montana.
Well, except for Montana, yeah. Yes. And except for the list of the stuff that is in the Civil Rights Act. So the hiring and firing process is all about discrimination. It's, you pick apart the good and the not so good of your people. That's how promotion works. But you're just simply not allowed to discriminate on race, color, religion, sex. If you're in the federal, you can't discriminate based on politics if you're a civil servant. But but you can be fired for anything else, right? And so that's where the firings for violating a company's sense of perception comes into play, or even a university. So I'm curious. You said, well, Cindy, of course you can be fired. You don't have to be fired at a public institution if you have tenure. So what is this?
So private institution. So I have worked for a private institution where individuals are given tenure. What that does is it creates a contract, right? So at will employment can be disrupted by contracts.
Okay.
That's there. And that's kind of the argument associated with tenure, is that you've now given them certain protections, which in my world is called academic freedom, to be able to say controversial things, to be able to push the envelope in the spirit of producing additional knowledge, future items, and freedom of speech that's happening. So the whole purpose of tenure originally was designed so that you could do things like research on popular ideas. Let's say it could be 1940s and birth control, right? You shouldn't be fired because you want to talk about birth control out loud, even though it was taboo back then. Where, it's that type of idea that is behind academic freedom. It also could then potentially extend to what we are talking about now, which is, this is my political view, it is my freedom of speech, and it is my academic freedom to be able to say or bash my own institution in this situation. I've actually seen professors go to popular press, bash their own institution that they work for, and keep their job, which would never happen in the private sector because of this tenure protection.
Right. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. And I did actually pull up a list of like some of the roles that shocked the heck out of me that they were fired. But let's over this recent event, well, and it's just such a tragedy. So over saying things that may have been considered insensitive, and I don't know what all of what was said, but we saw someone at the NASDAQ make a post potentially condoning violence. And again, it was private sector, it was at will, they were fired because it did not reflect the corporate policy. But then we saw a Washington Post columnist actually get let go. This one I think will be pretty controversial. I think this one will probably have a lawsuit over it. But again, it was a breach of editorial standards and reputational risk. So I think the Washington Post has potentially a legitimate claim. In my list, I see a couple of other news organizations that same thing. That's you're violating your editorial standards, right? I think,
yeah,
and those I think are often likely in writing, and we just need to read them. I can tell you that the Code of Business Conduct and I say Code of Business Conduct and recognizing that at the moment you and I both work for universities, it's the code of something conduct, right? But we've signed a document as part of our employment saying that we will behave in a certain way, and I'm sure that a lot of that is subjective.
Yeah. So like the newspapers, the items like that, where it actually, you feel like you're harming the reputation, that part of it, I can kind of understand, at least from a business point of view. The ones that shocked me were things like bag handlers at American Airlines. There was supposedly one who got fired there.
Pilot.
There was somebody at Home Depot who, like a manager who refuse to do like copy of like a memorial for Charlie Kirk, that got fired because he said it was propaganda. That was there. So there's some really interesting ones that actually got fired as well. People that are kind of what I'm going to call below the radar, as far as like reputational risk. But there really isn't anybody below the radar anymore, because your comment on social media can go viral wherever you are.
Absolutely.
So maybe there is a situation where you can't be low level enough to not cause corporate risk. And I think that's a really interesting conversation to have, which is why can you get fired? Who can get fired? But then what does that mean for businesses when you got to think about people you never would have thought of causing a potential issue at your corporation are now there? The janitor says something wrong, it can blow up.
Agreed. But I think we've seen this for a long time. If we think about, if it's not the individual posting themselves, there have been people walking around with cell phone cameras this whole time. Like, we've seen all the recordings on all the airplanes. We talked about the airlines, right? We know that things happen and it shows up on social media, and whoever did the poor customer service thing gets fired. So I think in general, the idea is that we are all walking and talking billboards for our companies at some point, and if we do something that potentially could make them feel bad, they have the right to fire us, right?
Yeah.
I said feel bad, but anything that can put them at reputational risk. Sorry, companies don't have feelings, but anything that could potentially harm their reputation, the first thing they're going to do is fire you, because that's how they protect their reputation.
Exactly. That's exactly right. So I think that in the end of the lesson, I actually had this on Monday morning, 8 a.m. class, instead of talking about the market, which is what I always start our class with. It was an argument about why can you get fired? How can you get fired? Is it right to fire somebody at that point? With the lesson that I'm trying to teach the students that says, especially on the Lisa Cook thing, which happened before she even got the job, right?
Right.
Don't post on social media, people. Like, and especially don't post these type of political views. Yes, you have the freedom and freedom of speech, right? But just because you have the right to do it, it's not necessarily the smart thing to do for your own personal employment.
Yes. Well, so with powerful rights come a lot of responsibility, right? And we're starting to see that you can be held accountable for your words. And so, but we are posting on social media right now. We're having an open conversation, and the goal has been and always has been for us is can we see the angles that would help us understand the decisions people made? So rather than trying to judge. So I would say that a lot of what we're seeing is that righteous indignation or the judgment that people are just publishing openly. It's coming back to bite them.
Yeah. I think you're right. And I think you have to be very smart about how you handle sensitive situations. And I think people need to realize that, right? You would never go to somebody in person and say things like some of the stuff that happened. So
Agreed.
why do you think you're safe doing it on social media? Because there are consequences beyond just you, right? Your family, your company, they are recognizing that each one is an individual risk. So
Absolutely.
I think it's fascinating. We're going to see what continues to happen, because I think people are going to need to watch their backs. I mean, Lisa Cook, watch your back, right? All of the everybody else.
Yes. Yes.
Potentially going to happen.
Because what we're seeing is to drop the interest rates or to change the interest rates, it's decision by committee, but getting fired is not.
Well, it's potentially going to be committee, right? Lisa Cook's going to get fired based off of the committee of the Supreme Court.
Oh, that's true. Okay, totally fair. Well, fair or unfair, but yes. Agreed. So,
fair or unfair. It is actually really, really interesting, right? You can cut interest rates. You can't cut politics out of your regular life. So, watch what you say online, because your boss may just cut you too.
Absolutely. There you go. That's absolutely right. So this has been fun. We'll continue to watch, and fingers crossed that that the Fed will remain independent, and if they don't, that history doesn't repeat itself.
There we go. I like it. So thanks everybody for listening to Seriously, What Could They Be Thinking? And until next time, speak wisely and spend carefully.
That's right. Keep your spreadsheets handy and your coffee strong. Have a good one.